What do you do when the weapon meant to protect your greatest secret becomes the very thing that reveals where it's buried? Before we go underground, hit like right now so more people see this story. Subscribe if you want more of these deep dives, and send this to the one friend who actually reads the news instead of just scrolling past it. Somewhere under a mountain in northern Iran in the middle of the night, the ground began to shake in a way it had never shaken before. Workers below felt at first a sound, a deep rolling thunder pressing down through solid rock. Then they felt it as motion. Dust falling from ceilings that had stood untouched for years. This was not a drill. This was not an earthquake. This was the sound of a weapon doing something almost nobody believed a weapon could do: reach a target that an entire mountain had been built to protect. For more than 15 years, the people who designed that facility trusted one simple idea. If you go deep enough, if you surround your secret with enough solid stone, nothing above ground can touch you. That idea shaped billions of dollars in construction. It shaped years of political standoffs. It shaped the entire strategy of a nation trying to protect a nuclear program from the reach of the sky. That idea did not survive the night we're about to walk through together. This is the story of Fordow, a nuclear enrichment site buried inside a mountain near the Iranian city of Qom. And the moment a single American weapon, one built specifically to defeat exactly this kind of protection, proved that depth alone was never going to be enough. But this isn't really a story about a bomb. Bombs are simple. This is a story about patience, about the slow, quiet work of watching a mountain for over a decade until its weaknesses became visible. And it's a story about what happens next, because destroying a facility and destroying a program are two very different things, and the gap between them might be the most important part of this entire story. To understand why Ford became the center of one of the tensest military standoffs of the last 20 years, you have to go back further than most people expect. Iran's nuclear program did not begin as a secret weapons project. It began decades ago with help from Western countries, built on the hope that nuclear energy could modernize the country and give it a stronger place on the world stage. That hope did not survive the political upheaval that followed. After the 1979 revolution, after years of war with Iraq, after sanctions and isolation piled on top of each other, something shifted inside Iran's leadership. A belief took hold that the rest of the world wanted Iran to stay weak, and that any real strength the country built for itself would always be treated as a threat. By the early 2000s, international inspectors were already raising concerns about facilities like Natanz, a sprawling site where long rows of centrifuges spun uranium gas into higher and higher levels of purity. Iran insisted the program was peaceful. Much of the world was not convinced. And then satellite images picked up something strange near the city of Qom, roads appearing where roads made no obvious sense. Earth being moved in patterns that didn't look like ordinary construction. It looked more like a wound being carefully opened in the side of a mountain. By 2009, the secret couldn't hold any longer. The United States, Britain, and France announced publicly that Iran had been secretly constructing an enrichment facility built directly into a mountainside. This was Fordow. Unlike Natanz, sitting exposed in open desert, Fordow was tucked under hundreds of feet of solid rock, protected by geography as much as by weapon systems. It was protected by a simple, quiet assumption: no conventional bomb could reach it. Here's why that mattered so much. You don't bury delicate, precision-built machinery under a mountain because it's convenient. You do it because you're expecting trouble. Centrifuges are not rugged, industrial equipment. They are extraordinarily sensitive machines, spinning at speeds fast enough that even a small vibration or a tiny shift in the floor beneath them can destroy the whole system instantly. If you can't make the machines indestructible, you make their surroundings indestructible instead. Fordow wasn't just a building. It was an answer to modern air power. A bet that no aircraft, no missile, and no bomb could reach deep enough to matter. For a long time, that bet looked like it was paying off. America's older bunker-busting weapons had built fearsome reputations in earlier conflicts, but they were designed for hardened command posts and buried shelters, not for a nuclear facility hidden inside a literal mountain. The GBU-28, a weapon famous for punching through reinforced concrete, weighed around 5,000 lb. Against something the scale of Fordow, that simply wasn't enough. The challenge wasn't just building a bigger explosion. If a weapon breaks apart on impact, it turns into a surface blast, all its force wasted at the top instead of where it's needed. If it detonates too early, the energy disperses in the wrong place entirely. The real challenge was building something that could survive the punishing trip through solid rock, long enough to reach the rooms that actually mattered. That need produced the GBU-57, more widely known as the massive Ordnance Penetrator. The name sounds almost blunt, like something built without imagination. The weapon itself is anything but crude. It stretches more than 20 ft long and weighs around 30,000 lb, encased in a thick steel shell engineered to slam into rock at tremendous speed and stay intact the entire way down. Inside sits a large explosive payload, but the most impressive part of this weapon was never the explosive itself. It was the timing. The bomb has to sense in a very real engineering sense exactly where it is as it travels downward. It has to distinguish between open air, loose rubble, dense rock, and empty chambers. It has to hold off detonating until it reaches the point where the blast can do the most damage. Deep inside, a structure most people assumed was permanently out of reach. That kind of precision doesn't come from the explosive charge. It comes from years of design, testing, modeling, and most importantly, intelligence. Because a weapon this advanced is still only half the equation. The other half is knowledge, and that knowledge took over a decade to build. Analysts spent years studying Fordow from a distance, watching access roads, tracking construction patterns, monitoring cooling systems and power lines, examining every subtle detail visible from orbit, a new structure appearing here, a ventilation shaft appearing there, a slight change in the slope of the mountain after new excavation began. This kind of work doesn't make headlines. Nobody writes an exciting story about analysts quietly comparing satellite photographs for 15 years straight. But to that patient, invisible work is often the difference between a mission that fails and a mission that finds the one path the original designers never accounted for. And Fordow's real weak points were never going to be dramatic steel doors or blast gates. They were something far more ordinary. Ventilation shafts. Every underground facility needs to breathe. Without proper airflow, heat builds up fast, workers can't function, and sensitive machinery starts to fail. It's almost poetic in a dark way. The very openings that let a mountain bunker survive are the same openings that can eventually help someone else attack it. Iranian engineers clearly understood this risk, especially as tensions escalated. In the days leading up to what later became known as Operation Midnight Hammer, satellite images reportedly showed a burst of activity around the site. Trucks moving in and out, entrances suddenly busier than usual, protective coverings appearing over shaft openings. To an outside observer, it looked like a facility scrambling to shield its last vulnerable points. But if American planners had already spent years mapping exactly those vulnerable points, that last-minute reinforcement wasn't a surprise. It was simply confirmation that they were looking in the right place all along. Getting the weapon, there was its own enormous challenge. The massive Ordnance Penetrator is far too heavy for standard aircraft. Only the B-2 Spirit, the stealth bomber developed near the end of the Cold War, is capable of carrying it into combat. And even then it has to be carried internally, since anything mounted externally would destroy the aircraft's stealth profile. Each B-2 can carry 2 of these weapons at a time, and there are only a small number of B-2s in the entire world. Every hour those aircraft spend in the air requires refueling tankers, maintenance teams, precise route planning, and constant weather monitoring. Rescue plans and electronic countermeasures have to be ready before a single engine even starts. A mission like this, flying from the United States all the way to Iran and back, is not one dramatic aircraft crossing the sky alone. It's an enormous coordinated system stretched across continents, fuel positioned in advance, pilots flying routes they've rehearsed for years without ever expecting to use them for real. When the full picture of Operation Midnight Hammer eventually came out, the most striking part wasn't even the explosion itself. It was the choreography behind it. Bombers moving in near total silence. Tanker aircraft holding position at exactly the right moment. Fighters clearing space and contested airspace. Submarines positioned to fire cruise missiles in support. Decoy flights heading in the opposite direction, pulling attention away from the real strike package, moving quietly along another route entirely. The goal was simple to describe and brutally difficult to execute. Strike the nuclear infrastructure at Fordow and nearby facilities within a tight window. Then withdraw before Iran could organize any meaningful response. The message being sent wasn't only that America owned a weapon capable of reaching this deep. It was that America had built an entire system designed to deliver it. A bomb sitting somewhere in storage is a threat, but a weapon connected to stealth technology, precise intelligence, complex refueling logistics, exact timing, and enough political will to actually pull the trigger, that's not just a threat anymore, that's a decision. For more than a decade, Fordow forced that exact decision onto the table. And for just as long, nobody wanted to be the one to make it. There's a much bigger question sitting underneath all of this, and it's exactly where we're headed next. So stick with me here, because this is where the story stops being about engineering and starts being about something far more human. If this kind of grounded fact-based storytelling is what keeps you watching, do me a favor and tap that subscribe button. It genuinely helps this channel keep making videos like this one. The tension surrounding Fordow was never only about missiles and explosives. It ran much deeper than that, touching questions of politics, morality, and the fragile balance of power across an entire region. Every decision-maker involved understood that whatever choice they made would ripple far beyond one mountain, shaping alliances, economies, and public trust for years afterward. If Iran could keep enriching uranium far underground, safe from any realistic threat of attack, its leverage on the world stage would grow enormously. But if the United States struck first, it risked igniting a far wider war, one that could easily rally the Iranian public around a government it might otherwise be furious with. Any American president considering this decision knew it could set a precedent. Other future leaders might feel pressured to follow entirely different crises down the road. Israel watched all of this from an even closer, more personal distance. Israeli officials had long believed that a nuclear-armed Iran would fundamentally reshape the security landscape of the Middle East. Yet Israel itself lacked the specific combination of aircraft, munitions, range, and refueling capability needed to strike a target as deeply buried as Fordow. That left the hardest, most consequential decision sitting entirely in Washington's hands. By the middle of the 2020s, the situation had grown even more volatile. An earlier nuclear agreement had slowed parts of Iran's program for a while, but it had also turned into a political battlefield in its own right. The United States withdrew from that agreement in 2018. Iran responded over time by loosening its own self-imposed limits, steadily increasing enrichment levels. International inspectors kept sounding the alarm. Uranium enriched to around 60% purity isn't a finished nuclear weapon by any means, but it sits far beyond anything a normal power plant would ever require, and it dramatically shortens the technical distance to weapons-grade material. Every new stockpile figure that leaked out wasn't just a number on a page. It represented time, and everyone watching understood exactly what was ticking away in the background. Then came the broader clash between Iran and Israel. After days of intense strikes across Iranian territory, reports described extensive damage to surface-level defenses and military infrastructure. But Fordow remained the one problem nobody else seemed able to solve. It wasn't dangerous because it was massive. It was dangerous because it was protected by something far harder to defeat than steel or radar. Geology itself, that's a fundamentally different kind of shield. You can jam radar, you can intercept missiles, you can crack concrete with the right weapon, but a mountain doesn't respond to any of that. It simply sits there heavy and indifferent, daring anyone foolish enough to waste their best weapons scratching at its surface. That's precisely why the eventual strike focused so intensely on the entrances the facility couldn't survive without. Early reports suggest the first weapons targeted surface protections and shaft openings, clearing the way. The bombs that followed were then aimed into those same narrow points, adjusted for slightly different depths and timings. This wasn't the older idea of a single massive bomb, hoping the explosion alone would be enough. It was closer to driving a series of steel fists through the exact same wound, each one reaching a little further than the last, each one making the next strike more effective. The actual physics behind this are strange enough to sit with for a moment. A bunker-busting weapon doesn't need to destroy every single room to a facility like this. Underground, as blast energy behaves in ways that don't match our normal intuition. In open air, pressure spreads outward and weakens quickly inside solid rock. That same shock wave travels through stone, concrete, and steel, finding corners, slamming into walls, turning solid floors into rippling waves of force. When several detonations happen at carefully planned depths, those pulses can overlap and place enormous stress on the entire structure. Even if a chamber doesn't collapse completely, the sensitive equipment inside may already be finished. Centrifuges are built for extreme speed, not for punishment. Vibration alone can destroy them. A sudden loss of power or contamination can be just as fatal to the system. You don't need to melt these machines into slag. You only need to make them permanently unable to spin. That's the cruel irony sitting at the heart of this entire strategy. The deeper a facility sits, the more protection it seems to gain from ordinary weapons. But if a specialized weapon manages to find the right path inside, all of that surrounding mass stops acting like armor and starts acting like a hammer. The rock that once offered comfort becomes the very thing amplifying the destruction. The engineers who designed Fordow were not careless people. They clearly understood modern air power. They knew Israel had struck nuclear facilities before in other countries. They understood that the United States had spent decades refining precision strike capability to an extraordinary degree. If they made any real mistake, it was believing that the technological contest between hiding and finding would simply freeze in place once their mountain was finished. They built their defenses against the weapons that existed at the time. Their eventual opponent spent years building weapons and intelligence specifically around the mountain they had already built. In the first hours and days after the strike, official statements sounded almost absolute. Words like severe damage and total destruction appeared repeatedly. Satellite images showed collapsed ridgelines, disturbed earth, blocked entrances, and clear signs that the ground above parts of the facility had physically shifted. To a lot of people watching from the outside, the story felt finished. The mountain had been hit. The weapon had worked. Exactly as intended, the most protected nuclear site in Iran was gone. But real conflicts almost never end with one single clean picture. And that's exactly the uncomfortable truth we need to sit with in the next part of this story. Quick pause here because what comes next genuinely changes how you should think about everything we've just covered. If you want to see where this leads, make sure you're subscribed. And if you know someone who only pays attention to the headlines instead of the full picture, this is the video to send them. Assessing real battle damage is an incredibly slow process under the best circumstances. And it becomes even harder when the target sits buried underground, controlled entirely by the country that was just attacked. Some of the most important evidence about what actually happened simply stays buried behind collapsed tunnels, completely out of view. Then the doubts started surfacing. Early intelligence assessments, some labeled as low confidence, reportedly suggested the strikes may have only delayed Iran's nuclear progress by a matter of months rather than years. Other officials pushed back firmly, insisting the damage was far more serious and long-lasting than that. Independent analysts warned that both sides in this argument had obvious reasons to exaggerate in opposite directions. Governments generally prefer their victories to sound complete and decisive. Adversaries generally prefer their survival to sound total and unaffected. The actual truth tends to sit somewhere quietly in between those two extremes. Here's the deeper problem worth understanding. A bomb can absolutely collapse tunnels and destroy expensive machinery. What it cannot do is erase knowledge from the minds of the engineers and scientists who built the program in the first place. It cannot guarantee that every single gram of enriched material